So welcome to our next episode on our series exploring Catholic social teaching. And at JCTR we wanted to explore with you today the relationship between Catholic social teaching and the budget, because we recently had a publication of our national budget and we thought we'd explore with you the relationship between Catholic social teaching and the budget. So what is this relationship? Just to remind us, Catholic social teaching is when the Church looks at the scriptures and tradition and looks at the community and what's going on around it, and she tries to see how scripture can relate to what is happening in the community around it, and what is the call of God to the Church and to the communities when it looks at what the situation is on the ground for people at any one time. So now, how is this body of teaching, how is it applied to the budget? Or how is it applicable to the budget? Well, in a similar way, the government, when it prepares a budget, looks around at what's happening in the community at the time. What do people need? What resources, importantly, do the people need to thrive? And then it prepares a budget. What we can say is that if the government wanted to look to Catholic social teaching to find principles to help it to prepare a budget, it can certainly do so. And I would like to just outline for you 3 principles that are important, or that may be important, if the government were to look at Catholic social teaching to help it to prepare a budget. The first principle is what we call the universal destination of goods. So in order to explain this, we have to realize that God made us, and also God made everything on this planet for us to enjoy. And so when we have enough, when we've used enough of the resources that this planet has to offer for us and for our families, Catholic social teaching says that we need to share these resources with others, with our brothers and sisters, because that is God's design. That is what God made all of our resources on our planet for everyone to enjoy. That gives us a bit of context to understand. In 2013, Pope Francis made the statement that when we throw away food, when we waste food, we are actually stealing this food from the poor, because God intended that food to be used by everyone. And when we waste it, we are not allowing people to have access to that food. The second principle in Catholic social teaching, which may be important for the government to consider when preparing its budget, is subsidiarity. So basically, when this principle states that individuals should be responsible for their own lives, that we should be responsible for our lives, that when organizations do things for us that we can do for ourselves, Catholic social teaching says that this is not a good thing. So, when making a budget, for instance, apart from taking into account that resources are intended for everyone, the government should also understand that they are making a budget to enable us to do things for ourselves. A nice example of this is the CDF, the Constituency Development Fund. And the government in its budget has increased the allocation to the CDF, which is a wonderful thing that the government has done. It brings the decisions, or it brings local responsibility to spending of money. But JCTR would recommend that the government makes it more decentralized, because when the government allows decisions, key decisions, to be made on how that money is used in the CDF, brings those decisions to be made at the local level, then it basically is allowing local responsibility. It is allowing local individuals to have an input into their future. So when the government is making up its budget, it can look to this principle of subsidiarity to guide it. The final principle is the principle of common good. And so one of the teachings of Catholic social teaching is that the sole purpose of the state is to nurture the common good, is to make sure that certainly the resources of the state are used solely for the purpose of the common good. But what is the common good? Is the common good whatever the voters think it is, or is the common good whatever is most popular at the time? No. The common good can be thought of as whatever we need in order for us to live as God intended us to live. So this is very hard to describe in many ways, but perhaps we can describe it by saying it refers to holistic development. So, the government needs to consider what would enable us to live our intellectual lives in the best way possible. For example, by education, to expand our minds. Perhaps the government needs to consider how our social lives are to be deepened and enjoyed. For example, are we living in a way that best expresses our cultural backgrounds? Are we living in a way that spiritually, are we living in a way that enables us to worship God in the best way possible? And finally, our physical well-being, our physical health. Are we living in a way that enables us to live physically in the way that God intended us to live? All this points to a broad vision. So the principle of taking care of the common good would ask the government to have a broad vision about how it spends our resources for our common good. So that is just a brief exploration of 3 important principles from Catholic social teaching that could help the government in making up its budget. The principle of destination, the universal destination of goods, the principle of subsidiarity, and the principle of the common good. Thank you for joining us for this episode on Catholic social teaching, and we look forward to engaging with you further.